Settle in, let your shoulders soften, and allow the noise of the modern world to fade into a distant hum. Tonight, we are not setting sail on a dragon-proud longship in search of plunder or glory. We will not stand in the shield wall, listening for the roar of an oncoming charge. Instead, we will take a much quieter journey, a gentle journey, guided by the flicker of a central hearth fire and the rhythm of a life dictated by the seasons. We are traveling back more than 1,000 years to a small settlement nestled beside a cold grey fjord in Scandinavia. We are going to spend a day in a Viking village to understand the lives of the people who stayed behind, the farmers, the artisans, the children, and the unfree, the individuals whose daily struggles and quiet routines formed the true backbone of the Norse world. If you enjoy these journeys into the past, I'd really appreciate a quick like or even a subscribe. It helps our small community of quiet history lovers grow more than you know. I'm always curious where you all are listening from, so feel free to drop a comment with your location and what time it is there. It's fascinating to see our global community connecting through these stories. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first sensation is the cold. It is a deep, penetrating chill that has crept through the turf walls and settled in the very marrow of the longhouse during the darkest hours of the night. You are lying on a raised wooden platform that runs along the wall, the straw mattress beneath you rustling with every slight movement. The air is heavy with a complex blend of scents, the lingering aroma of yesterday's wood smoke, the damp, earthy smell of the packed dirt floor, the faint, not unpleasant musk of sleeping bodies and woolen blankets, and a sharper, animal scent from the far end of the building, where the family's precious livestock are sheltered from the harsh winter. There are no windows here, only a single smoke hole in the thatched roof, through which a few defiant stars might have been visible hours ago. Now, only a faint pearly grey light filters down, promising a dawn that is still more of an idea than a reality. The Great Hall is a cavern of shadows, its immense space, perhaps 30 meters long, defined more by sound than by sight. You can hear the slow, deep breathing of your family, a chorus of quiet inhalations and exhalations that fills the communal space. It is a place of profound togetherness, where multiple generations live and sleep under a single roof, with little concept of privacy as we would know it. A cough echoes from across the central hearth. An elder stirs, their joints protesting the cold. The rhythm of life in this place is ancient and unchanging, and it begins long before the sun crests the nearby hills. For some, it begins now in this deep, resonant quiet. Imagine yourself as a thrall, an unfree labourer. You were not born here. Perhaps you were captured in a raid on a distant shore years ago. Your life is not your own. While the family who owns you sleeps, your day has already begun. There is no gentle rousing, only the cold reality of duty. You swing your legs off the sleeping bench, your bare feet meeting the frigid, hard-packed earth. Your tunic is coarse, undyed homespun wool, a constant, scratchy reminder of your station. Your first task is to coax the heart of the home back to life. The long, rectangular fire pit in the centre of the hall holds a bed of precious embers, carefully banked and insulated with ash the night before. With gentle breath and a handful of dry kindling, you nurture a tiny flame. It wavers, threatening to expire in the cold air, but then it catches, and a soft orange glow begins to push back against the oppressive gloom. This fire is everything. It is warmth, it is light, and it will be the source of all cooked food for the day. As the flames grow stronger, your next chore awaits. You pick up 2 heavy wooden buckets and step toward the sturdy wooden door. The iron latch is cold to the touch. Outside, the world is a study in shades of grey. The air is sharp and clean, carrying the scent of frost and the distant tang of salt water from the fjord. The ground is hard, frozen solid, and your footsteps make a sharp crunching sound. Other longhouses, their turf roofs blending into the muted landscape, are still dark and silent. Your destination is the stream, a lifeline of fresh water for the settlement. It flows relentlessly, even in the deepest winter, and the journey is a familiar one. The water is achingly cold as it splashes over your hands, filling the buckets. The return journey is a struggle, the weight of the water straining your arms and back. This water is for the morning's cooking, for the animals, and for the family to wash their hands and faces. It is one of the many physically demanding tasks that will fill your day. Chores performed without question or complaint. Back inside the longhouse, you pour some of the water into a trough for the animals at the far end of the building, a space known as the byre, The lowing of a cow, impatient for its morning feed, greets you. This part of the longhouse is loud and pungent, a constant reminder of the farm's most valuable assets. Keeping the livestock alive through the winter is paramount, and their warmth, in turn, helps to heat the entire structure. Now imagine yourself from a different perspective. You are a blacksmith's apprentice, perhaps the son of the smith himself. You are young, but your hands are already strong, your life defined by the fire of the forge. Your morning begins not with fetching water, but with the specific needs of the craft. While the thrall tends to the hearth, you make your way to the workshop, which might be a dedicated outbuilding or an extension of the longhouse itself. The air in the forge is thick with the ghosts of yesterday's work, the sharp metallic scent of cooled iron, and the acrid smell of coal dust. Your first task is to prepare the forge itself, cleaning out the clinker, the glassy, impure residue from the burning coal, and ensuring a fresh supply of charcoal is ready. You work the bellows, a simple but effective device made of wood and leather, pumping air into the forge's heart. The rhythmic creak and whoosh of the bellows is the first note in the day's symphony of steel. The goal is to create a deep, intensely hot fire, a miniature sun that will soon render solid iron malleable. Back in the longhouse, the rest of the household is beginning to stir as the main hearth fire grows, providing both light and a modest circle of warmth. Women are now awake, their domain being the tasks performed within the threshold. One begins the laborious process of grinding grain for the morning meal. She uses a quernstone, two heavy circular stones, one placed on top of the other. Pouring dried barley or oats into a hole in the top stone, she rotates it by hand, the grinding of stone on stone, a slow, patient sound. It is back-breaking work, but essential. This flour will form the basis of the first meal of the day, a simple, nourishing porridge known as grøt. The meal itself is a quiet, functional affair. The Vikings typically ate only two main meals a day, the dagmal, or day meal, in the morning, and the natmal, or night meal, in the evening. There are no individual plates as we might imagine them. The family gathers on the benches around the fire, and the porridge is served in shared wooden bowls, eaten with wooden spoons. It might be accompanied by a piece of hard, flat bread made from rye or barley, and perhaps a small portion of leftover fish or meat from the night before. It is a diet built for sustenance, not luxury, providing the necessary energy for a day of hard labour. For the thrall, the meal is even simpler. Perhaps just the last scrapings from the pot, eaten quickly before the day's real work begins. Once the dagmal is concluded, the settlement comes to life. The day's labour begins in earnest, a rhythm of communal and individual tasks. The men's work largely lies outside the home. They might be heading to the forest to fell trees for firewood or repairs, or checking their fishing nets down at the fjord. If it is the right time of year, they would be engaged in the arduous tasks of farming. Ploughing the cold, hard soil was done with a simple wooden ard, a scratch plough that was often pulled by oxen, or, in some cases, by thralls. This was some of the most physically demanding work imaginable. For the thrall, the morning is a blur of such labour. After tending to the animals, you might be tasked with mucking out the stalls, a foul-smelling but vital job. The manure is a precious resource, to be used later for fertilizing the fields. Or perhaps you are sent to the shoreline, where vast quantities of fish are being preserved for the long winter. You spend hours gutting and cleaning herring, your hands numb from the cold and slick with fish scales. The fish will then be either hung on large wooden racks to be dried by the cold, clean air, or packed in barrels with layers of precious salt, a common and effective method of preservation. Meanwhile, at the forge, the apprentice's day is one of heat, noise, and focused repetition. The master blacksmith enjoys a high status in the community. He is both artist and engineer, the creator of tools that sustain life and weapons that take it. But the path to mastery is long. As an apprentice, your primary job is to learn the fundamentals through endless practice. Today's task may be to make nails. The master hands you a length of iron, heated in the forge until it glows a bright cherry red. Your job is to hammer it, to draw it out, to shape the point, and then, with a specialized tool, to form the head. The sound of the hammer on the anvil becomes your world, a steady, ringing rhythm that echoes through the settlement. Clank, clang, clang. With each strike, you learn how the metal moves, how it yields to force and fire. The heat is immense and the air is filled with flying sparks. It is tiring, dirty work. A good apprentice might be expected to produce hundreds or even 1,000 nails in a single day. These are not glorious swords or ornate brooches. but they are the essential fasteners that hold the longhouses, the ships, and the very structure of the village together. Your work is a constant struggle for consistency and precision, a lesson in patience taught by fire and iron. Inside the longhouse, the women continue their work. One sits at a large vertical loom, a heavy wooden frame propped against the wall. The air around her is filled with the soft thud of the warp-weighted threads and the smooth slide of the shuttle. Weaving was a constant and vital task, turning raw wool, which had already been cleaned, carded, and spun into thread, all laborious tasks in themselves, into the cloth needed for tunics, cloaks, and blankets. Another woman might be mending clothes by the firelight, her needle darting in and out of the coarse fabric. Nothing is wasted here. Every piece of clothing is repaired and patched until it can be repaired no more. As midday passes, the pale sun reaches its zenith, offering little warmth but marking the passage of time. There is no formal break for a midday meal. People might pause to eat a piece of dried fish or a handful of berries preserved in honey, but the rhythm of work is largely unbroken. The thrall's afternoon might bring a different kind of toil. You could be tasked with repairing a section of the wattle and daub fence that surrounds the farmstead, weaving willow branches between wooden posts and plastering the gaps with a mixture of clay, mud, and animal dung. Or you might spend hours at the quernstone, taking over the grinding of grain, a task so physically taxing it was often relegated to the unfree. Your world is one of constant, heavy labor with little respite. The apprentice at the forge continues to hammer. His muscles ache, his face is streaked with soot, but under the watchful eye of the master, he is slowly turning raw material into useful objects. He learns to read the color of the heated metal, from red to orange to a brilliant yellow-white, to know its readiness. He learns the different sounds the hammer makes, a sharp ring for a solid strike, a dull thud for a misstep. It is a sensory language, a dialogue between the smith and his medium. As the afternoon light begins to wane, a shift occurs across the settlement. The outdoor work begins to wrap up. Animals that were taken to pasture are herded back towards the safety of the longhouse. The sounds of chopping wood and hammering fade, replaced by the sounds of preparation for the evening meal. The natmal. This meal is typically the main one of the day. A large iron cauldron suspended over the central hearth from a hook bubbles away. Tonight it holds a simple stew, or seder. Into the pot goes whatever is available. Some salted pork or mutton, root vegetables like turnips and carrots that have been stored in a cool pit since the autumn harvest, and perhaps some hardy greens like cabbage or kale. The stew is seasoned with salt and maybe some wild herbs. It simmers for hours, its savory aroma slowly filling the smoky hall, a comforting promise of warmth and sustenance. As darkness falls completely, the longhouse becomes an island of light and life in a sea of blackness. With the day's work done, the family gathers once more on the benches around the fire. The stew is ladled into wooden bowls and eaten with the same rye bread from the morning. This is a time for the family to come together, to share the warmth of the fire and the food. It's a time for stories, for the elders to recount the sagas of gods and heroes, their voices rising and falling in the flickering firelight. For the blacksmith's apprentice, this is a moment of rest. He cleans his tools and his hands, the soot replaced by the smell of the evening stew. He sits with his family, his aching muscles a testament to a day of productive labor. He listens to the stories, his mind perhaps wandering to the mysteries of the Ulfbert swords he has heard whispers of, a level of mastery he can currently only dream of. For the thrall, the day is still not quite over. You serve the family their meal, standing in the shadows, waiting to clear away the bowls. Your own meal will be whatever is left in the pot. Afterwards, you may have to fetch more firewood, or tend to a final task before being allowed to rest. Your sleeping place is in the coldest part of the house, perhaps near the animal stalls, a clear demarcation of your status as property. There is no comfort, only the brief oblivion of sleep before the cold and the chores of a new day arrive. The fire in the central hearth is banked once more, its glow shrinking to a faint, pulsing red. The family settles down on their sleeping platforms, pulling thick wool and fur blankets over themselves. The longhouse grows quiet again. The only sounds are the sigh of the wind outside, the soft shifting of an animal in its stall, and the steady, deep breathing of a household that has survived another day. The darkness is absolute, a profound and heavy blanket that covers the settlement. Our story does not begin with Leif, but with his father, a man whose reputation was as fiery and memorable as his nickname, Eric the Red. To understand the son, you must first understand the father. and the legacy of restlessness he bestowed upon his children. Erik Thorvaldsson was born in Norway, but his life was marked by a pattern of conflict and expulsion. He was, to put it simply, a man with a difficult temperament. After his father was exiled from Norway for manslaughter, the family settled in the rugged, unforgiving landscape of Western Iceland. But the turmoil followed them. Erik, possessing the same volatile nature, found himself embroiled in a series of disputes with his neighbours. A disagreement over borrowed property escalated, lives were lost, and, just as his father had been, Erik was found guilty of killing other men. The Icelandic Assembly, the Althing, handed down its sentence. Erik the Red was to be outlawed, exiled from Iceland for 3 years. For many, this would have been a devastating blow. But for a man like Erik, a punishment was also an opportunity. He had heard whispers, old sailors' tales of a vast landmass to the west, cited by a man named Gunnbjörn Ulfsson when his ship was blown off course decades earlier. It was an unverified rumour, a ghost of a coastline on the edge of the known world. With his ships, his family, and his loyal followers, Erik set sail not back towards Norway, but into the unknown west. What he found was a land of immense glaciers, deep fjords, and a stark, imposing beauty. But he also found pockets of green, grassy meadows in the coastal areas during the summer months. He spent his 3 years of exile exploring this vast new territory, charting its fjords and identifying its most promising locations for settlement. When his exile was over, he returned to Iceland not as a humbled outlaw, but as a visionary salesman. He called the new territory Greenland, a deliberately appealing name designed to entice others to join him. He knew that a successful colony needed people, and people needed the promise of fertile land and a new beginning. The name was a masterstroke of marketing, suggesting a warmth and agricultural promise that the land itself would struggle to live up to. It was into this world, this remote experimental outpost on the very fringe of European existence, that Leif Erikson was born around the year 970. Imagine his childhood. It was not one of bustling towns or established traditions. It was a life lived in a place that was still being defined. His playground would have been the rocky shores of a fjord named Eriksfjordur, after his own father. His view would have been one of ice-choked waters and vast, silent mountains. Life in the Greenland colony was a constant struggle. The summers were short and the winters were long, dark, and brutally cold. The settlers brought their livestock, cattle, sheep, and goats, which struggled to survive on the limited grazing land. They built longhouses in the Norse tradition, like the one we have just left, their turf walls providing insulation against the relentless wind. They were farmers, but also hunters, relying heavily on caribou and seals to supplement their diet and provide skins for clothing. They were profoundly isolated, a tiny pocket of Norse culture clinging to the edge of a vast icy wilderness. Leif grew up here at his father's estate, known as Brattahlid. He was raised on stories of his father's daring and his grandfather's exile. The sea was not a barrier, but a road, and the horizon was not an end, but a question. He learned to read the weather, to navigate by the sun and stars, and to handle a ship in treacherous, ice-filled waters. He was the son of the colony's founder and chief, a position that brought with it both privilege and immense expectation. As a young man, around the year 1000, Leif undertook a significant journey, sailing east from Greenland back to the ancestral homeland of Norway. This was a rite of passage for the sons of prominent chieftains, a way to connect with the heart of the Norse world and make a name for themselves. He arrived at the court of King Olaf Tryggvason, a powerful and zealous ruler who was aggressively Christianizing Norway. For Leif, who had been raised in a land where the old gods, Odin, Thor, Freya, were still honored, the court of King Olaf must have been a world of startling contrasts. Here, a new faith was being imposed with fervor, often by force. The sagas tell us that Leif was converted to Christianity and baptized, a decision that was likely as pragmatic and political as it was spiritual. To win the favor of the king, one had to accept the king's god. King Olaf then gave Leif a new mission, to return to Greenland and introduce Christianity to the isolated settlers there. It was a task that would put him in direct ideological conflict with his fiercely pagan father, Erik the Red. And it is here that Leif's story takes its most famous turn. The journey back to Greenland was a long and difficult one, a lonely voyage across the vast, unpredictable North Atlantic, and something happened on that journey. The saga of the Greenlanders tells a straightforward tale. Leif's ship was blown far off course by storms, and he and his crew drifted for a long time until they sighted an unknown land, a land they had not been looking for, a land of which they had no charts. Imagine that moment. After weeks of seeing nothing but an endless expanse of grey water and grey sky, a smudge of green appears on the horizon. As they drew closer, they found a land unlike the barren shores of Greenland or the rocky coasts of Iceland. It was a place of gentle forests, flowing rivers teeming with salmon larger than any they had ever seen, and a climate so mild that the dew on the grass tasted sweet. Most remarkably, they found wild grapes growing in abundance, something utterly foreign to a Norseman. It was this discovery that led Leif to name the land Vinland, the land of wine. However, another version of the story, told in the saga of Eric the Red, gives a slightly different account. In this telling, the first European to sight this new world was not Leif, but an Icelandic merchant named Bjarni Herjolfsson, who had been blown off course years earlier while trying to reach Greenland. Bjarni saw the land, but being a cautious man focused on his original destination, he chose not to go ashore. The story of his sighting became a tale told in the halls of Greenland, a whisper of a potential new frontier. According to this version, Leif's journey was not one of accident, but of intention. Intrigued by Bjarni's story, Leif bought the man's ship, gathered a crew of 35 men, and set out deliberately to find and explore the lands that Bjarni had only glimpsed from a distance. Whichever version holds more truth, the accidental discovery or the purposeful expedition, the result was the same. Leif Erikson became the first known European to set foot in North America. His approach was methodical and careful. He was an explorer, not a conqueror. The sagas describe 3 distinct lands that Leif and his crew encountered. The first they came to was a barren, desolate place of flat rocks and glaciers. There was no soil, no life. It was a forbidding landscape. Leif named it Helluland, the land of flat stones. It offered them nothing, so they sailed on. The next land they found was a stark contrast. It was flat and heavily wooded, with wide shores of white sand. The sight of so many trees would have been astonishing to men from the sparse landscapes of Greenland and Iceland. The potential for timber was immense. Leif named this place Markland, the land of forests, and again they sailed on, their curiosity pulling them further south. Finally they came to Vinland. Here, they found a place that seemed like paradise. They sailed up a river and into a lake and decided to build a temporary settlement for the winter. They constructed several large huts, a small base camp they called Leifsbuder or Leifsbooths. They spent the winter exploring this new world. The climate was so mild that their cattle could graze outdoors. The rivers were full of fish, the forests full of game, and the days and nights were more equal in length than they were in the extreme north, a detail they carefully noted. There was no fall in the dramatic sense for Leif Erikson. There was no great battle, no tragic betrayal that led to his ruin. Instead, his story simply changes course. After that one winter of discovery, Leif and his crew loaded their ship with a cargo of timber and grapes and sailed back to Greenland. His return was triumphant. He had not only fulfilled his mission of bringing Christianity to the colony, much to his father's initial displeasure, but he had also discovered a new land of immense promise. He was given the nickname Leif the Lucky, and then he never went back. Shortly after his return, his father, Eric the Red, passed away. As the eldest son, the responsibilities of leadership fell to Leif. He inherited the chieftaincy of the Greenland settlement, becoming the most important man in the colony his father had founded. His life was no longer one of exploration and adventure on the open sea. It became one of administration and survival. He was now responsible for the well-being of the entire community, for settling disputes, for organizing hunts, and for ensuring there was enough food to last through the long, dark winters. His focus shifted from the distant promise of Vinland to the immediate pressing realities of Brattahlid. The fall of Leif Erikson was not a fall from grace, but a descent into the quiet, unglamorous, and vital work of leadership. The explorer became a governor. Other voyages to Vinland would follow, led by his siblings, but they were fraught with conflict and were ultimately unsuccessful in establishing a permanent settlement. Leif Erikson lived out the rest of his days as a respected and steady leader in Greenland. He fades from the sagas, not because of failure, but because his life became one of routine and responsibility, the very rhythm of life we explored earlier. His story is a quiet reminder that even the greatest adventures must eventually come ashore. He was a man who stood with one foot in the old world of pagan heroes and the other in the new world of Christian faith. He pushed the boundaries of the known world further than any before him, only to be pulled back by the anchor of duty. Imagine him in his later years, standing on the shore of Eiriksfjörður, looking out to the west. Perhaps on some days, his thoughts drifted back to that gentle land of salmon and wild grapes. A brief shining moment in a long life of quiet hardship and steadfast leadership. His name would be remembered for that one singular achievement. But his life was defined by the long, slow, and steady work of seeing his community through another day, another season, another winter. And as the story of his great adventure settles in your mind, let it become just another tale whispered in the warmth of the longhouse, a story of a world beyond the fjord, a world you can visit now, only in your dreams. The sagas, like the one of Leif Erikson, are tales woven from memory and spoken words, carried across generations on the fire-lit air of the longhouse. They are powerful, but they are intangible. History, however, also speaks to us through objects, through things that you can touch, things that have weight and texture, things that have survived the long, slow decay of centuries. The blacksmith's apprentice we imagined earlier, his arms aching from the rhythm of the hammer, would have dreamt of one day creating a masterpiece. He would have known the feel of common iron, its strengths, and more importantly, its weaknesses. But even he might only have heard whispers of a blade so perfect, so impossibly advanced, that it seemed to be the work of magic rather than men. Let us leave the world of stories for a moment and step into the quiet, patient world of archaeology. We are going to delve into a mystery made not of words but of steel. A mystery that lay buried in the cold earth of Europe for 1,000 years, waiting to be unearthed. This is the enigma of the Ulfberht swords. Across Scandinavia and northern Europe, from the riverbeds of Germany to the burial mounds of Norway, archaeologists have unearthed a particular type of Viking Age sword. At a glance, it looks much like any other weapon of its time. A straight, double-edged blade, a simple crossguard, and a pommel to provide balance. They are artifacts of a violent age, unearthed from the graves of warriors and chieftains. But when these specific swords are examined more closely, they reveal a secret that has baffled historians and metallurgists for decades. Inlaid into the blade just below the hilt is a name, forged in a contrasting metal, Plumvelfbert Plus. The letters are stark and simple, capitalized and bracketed by crosses. But it is not the name itself that is the source of the mystery. It is the metal from which the sword is made. To understand the puzzle of the Ulfberht sword, you must first understand the nature of iron in the Viking Age. Most iron at the time was produced in a bloomery furnace. This process involved heating iron ore with charcoal to a temperature where the iron became a spongy mass, or bloom, filled with impurities known as slag. The blacksmith would then have to hammer this bloom repeatedly, folding the metal over on itself, trying to work out as much of the slag as possible. The resulting metal, wrought iron, was relatively soft and contained long, stringy inclusions of slag. A sword made this way could be serviceable, but it was imperfect. It might bend in the heat of battle, or its edge could dull quickly. The Ulfberht swords were different. When modern scientists analyzed the steel of a true Ulfberht blade, they discovered something astonishing. The metal was almost entirely free of slag. It had a carbon content that was both remarkably high and incredibly uniform, creating a type of steel that was immensely strong, yet flexible. It could hold a razor-sharp edge and withstand tremendous impact without shattering or bending. It was, by any measure, a superior metal, a high-performance material that should not have existed in 9th or 10th century Europe. The process required to create steel of this quality is known as the crucible method. This involves heating the iron ore to a much higher temperature, around 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, until it becomes a liquid. In this molten state, the impurities, the slag, can be skimmed off the top, and carbon can be added and mixed in evenly. The liquid steel is then poured into a mold, or ingot. The result is a clean, homogeneous, high-carbon steel. This was the kind of steel found in the Ulfberht blades. And here lies the enigma. The technology of the crucible furnace was believed to be unknown in Europe at the time. Blacksmiths in the Viking world simply did not have the ability to generate and contain the intense heat required to liquefy iron. That level of industrial technology wouldn't be rediscovered in the West for another 800 years during the Industrial Revolution. So the questions became simple, yet profound. Who made these swords, and how? The search for an answer takes us away from the cold fjords of Scandinavia, on a long and winding journey eastward. It follows a path not of warriors, but of merchants. The Vikings were not only raiders, they were also prolific traders. Men known as the Russ, primarily of Swedish origin, travelled not west, but south and east. They sailed their longships down the great rivers of Eastern Europe, the Volga and the Dnieper, navigating a vast network of waterways that connected the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. Imagine these long, slow journeys, the rhythmic dip of oars in dark water, the ships passing through dense, silent forests, through the lands of the Slavs and other peoples, towards the shining domes of Constantinople and the bustling markets of the Abbasid Caliphate. This was the Volga trade route, a vital artery of commerce that connected the far north with the sophisticated civilizations of the Middle East and Central Asia. And it is there, in places like modern-day Iran, Afghanistan, and Uzbekistan, that the secret of the Ulfberht swords appears to have originated. Archaeologists have discovered that smiths in this part of the world had mastered the crucible steel process centuries earlier. They produced what was known as Wootz steel, a legendary material famous for its strength and the beautiful watery patterns on its surface, which would later become known in the West as Damascus steel. The leading theory is that this crucible steel was one of the precious goods that travelled back north along the trade routes. It was likely not transported as finished swords, but as raw material, small, loaf-shaped ingots of pure, high-carbon steel. These unassuming lumps of metal would have been incredibly valuable, a rare and exotic material carried thousands of miles by boat and caravan, passing through countless hands before finally arriving in the workshops of Europe. This brings us to the second part of the mystery, the name itself. Ulfberht plus. The name is not Norse, it is Frankish, a Germanic name from the region of Francia, which corresponds roughly to modern-day Germany and France, particularly the Rhineland. This suggests that the swords themselves were not forged in Viking Scandinavia. Instead, it seems there was a master workshop, or perhaps a series of workshops, located in the Frankish Empire, which had acquired a supply of this extraordinary crucible steel from the East. The inscription itself is a mark of incredible skill. The letters were not simply etched onto the surface. They were pattern welded into the blade. This involved chiseling out the shape of the letters from the main body of the sword, then inserting twisted rods of a different colored steel wire into the grooves, and finally, forge welding the entire thing together under intense heat and pressure. The name became a permanent, integral part of the blade's structure. It was a declaration of quality, a brand name for one of the finest pieces of military technology available in the world at that time. Imagine a smith in the Rhineland, a man named Ulfberht, or perhaps the founder of a guild that bore his name. He has access to two precious things: the secret of how to properly forge this difficult crucible steel, and a supply of the raw ingots themselves, acquired through the long and tenuous trade route to the east. His workshop produces these blades, lighter, stronger, and sharper than any other. Their reputation spreads. A Viking chieftain, a wealthy merchant, or a Frankish nobleman would seek out an Ulfberht blade as a symbol of ultimate status and power. The fame of these swords was such that it seems they were even counterfeited. Archaeologists have found other swords from the same period with similar inscriptions, but with the letters slightly rearranged or misspelled. For example, Plum's VLFBERH plus T, with the final T outside the cross. When these counterfeit blades are analysed, they are invariably made of the inferior, locally produced bloomery iron. They were cheaper knockoffs, attempts by less skilled smiths to cash in on the legendary reputation of the true Ulfberht brand. So the Ulfberht sword is not just a Viking weapon, it is a profoundly multicultural artifact. It is a story of a material from Central Asia, crafted by a smith in Francia, and wielded by a warrior in Scandinavia. It is a testament to a forgotten age of global connection, a quiet piece of evidence that the world in the year 900 was far more interconnected than we often imagine. The mystery is not one of ghosts or magic. It is one of human ingenuity, trade, and the slow, patient transfer of knowledge and materials across immense distances. Think of it now, a lump of dark, refined steel, born in the heat of a crucible furnace in the east, travelling for months on rivers and seas, to be hammered into its final elegant form in a smoky workshop in the heart of Europe. A silent object that tells a story of a connected world. It rests now in the quiet of a museum, its keen edge still holding the secrets of its long journey, a masterpiece of an age we can now only try to imagine. An object like the Ulfberht sword, a marvel of steel and a testament to a connected world, was not merely a tool of war. It was a statement, a concentration of wealth, power, and status, held in a single perfectly balanced form. It was an artifact meant to be seen, to be admired, and to be worn in the one place where a man's position was constantly on display and under trial, the great hall of his chieftain. Let us now return to the longhouse, but we will not go back to the simple farming homestead, with its quiet rhythm of domestic chores. The evening is drawing in, and we have an invitation. Imagine yourself now, stepping out of the cold night, pushing aside a heavy hide-covered door, and entering the world of a different kind of longhouse. This is the hall of a jarl, a Viking chieftain, and tonight there is a feast. The first thing that greets you is a wave of sound and warmth that pushes back the night's chill. The jarl's hall is built on a scale far grander than a farmer's home. The ceilings are higher. The long rectangular fire pit in the center is a roaring river of flame, sending sparks dancing up towards the smoke-blackened rafters. The air is thick with a rich tapestry of scents. The mouth-watering aroma of meat roasting on a spit, the sweet, heady fragrance of honey and fermented apples, the sharp tang of wood smoke, and the underlying familiar scent of damp wool and dozens of closely gathered people. The walls here are not bare turf or simple wood. Woven tapestries depicting heroic battles or mythological scenes hang between the immense carved pillars that support the roof. These pillars themselves are works of art, their surfaces alive with the intricate, coiling forms of dragons and serpents, their stylized faces staring down at the proceedings with an ancient, wooden gaze. The light from the central fire is the only illumination, casting long, flickering shadows that make the carvings seem to wriggle and writhe in the gloom. The hall is already crowded, filled with the jarl's household, his family, and his personal retinue of elite warriors, known as the herd. This is a gathering of the powerful and the loyal, a display of the jarl's strength, which is measured not just in land or silver, but in the number of sword arms he can command. Imagine yourself finding a place on one of the lower benches. You are an observer, part of the crowd but not at its center. From here you can watch the rituals unfold. The feast does not begin with a chaotic rush for food. It is an ordered ceremonial affair. The first act belongs to the women of the household, led by the jarl's wife. She moves with a practiced grace, a symbol of the hall's prosperity and order. She carries a great drinking horn, perhaps rimmed with silver, filled with foaming mead. This is not just a drink, it is a ritual. She presents the first drink to her husband, the jarl. He accepts it, stands and speaks a toast. Perhaps he toasts the gods. Odin for wisdom in council, Thor for strength in battle. Or perhaps he toasts a revered ancestor, linking the present gathering to the great deeds of the past. He drinks deeply, and then the horn begins its journey. It is passed first to the most honored guest, and then down the benches, a symbol of the unity and shared purpose of the hall. Each man drinks from the same vessel, a gesture of community and trust. Then comes the food. This is no simple porridge or boiled stew. Thralls and servants move through the hall, their arms laden with food, a deliberate display of the jarl's wealth and generosity. A whole pig, roasted on a spit until its skin is crisp and crackling, is brought into the center of the hall to be carved. Great iron cauldrons are lifted from the fire, filled not with a thin broth, but with huge chunks of boiled mutton and beef. Platters are piled high with grilled salmon, smoked herring, and heaps of yellow cheese and butter. The bread is not a hard, simple flatbread, but a finer, lighter loaf. Instead of wooden plates, many use trenchers, thick slices of day-old bread that soak up the juices of the meat placed upon them and can themselves be eaten at the end of the meal or given as scraps to the dogs that patrol the floor. As the horns are refilled and the food is distributed, the atmosphere in the hall begins to change. The initial formality gives way to a low roar of conversation and laughter. The honeyed mead, a potent brew, works its magic, loosening tongues and warming spirits. Yet, even in the growing din, the structure of the evening remains. This is not just a party, it is a critical function of governance. Now the jarl rises again. The hall falls into a respectful quiet, the silence broken only by the crackle of the fire. This is the moment of gift-giving. A jarl's power rests on his ability to be a ring-giver, a lord who rewards loyalty with treasure. He calls a warrior forward by name. The man approaches the high seat, his face illuminated by the fire. The jarl speaks of the man's courage in a recent battle, or his loyal service through a long winter. Then, with a grand gesture, the jarl presents him with a gift. It might be a finely woven cloak from Francia, a pouch of silver coins, or, for the most valued warrior, a weapon, perhaps a fine new sword or a heavy silver arm ring which the warrior slides onto his forearm for all to see. The warrior in turn takes the gift and speaks an oath. He places his hand on the hilt of his sword and pledges his loyalty to the Jarl, his life in exchange for the Jarl's generosity and protection. This is the social contract of their world made visible. Treasure for loyalty, generosity for service. It is a carefully choreographed piece of political theatre, reaffirming the bonds that hold this dangerous and ambitious group of men together. As the night deepens, the next phase begins, the boasting. Fueled by mead and a sense of honor, warriors rise to their feet to make formal declarations. One might boast of his prowess, comparing his deeds to those of the heroes of old. Another might swear a solemn oath on the drinking horn to perform a great feat in the coming year, to be the first to climb aboard an enemy ship, or to venture into an unknown land. These are not idle boasts. They are public commitments. To fail in a sworn oath was a source of profound shame. This is also where the underlying tension of the hall can be most keenly felt. One man's boast might be seen as a challenge to another, a sharp retort, a mocking laugh. These things can quickly escalate. You can feel the subtle shifts in the room's energy. Men's hands rest near the hilts of their sayaks, the long knives they all carry. The Jarl watches these exchanges carefully. His presence, and the fear of his wrath, is often the only thing that prevents a boast from turning into a brawl, and a brawl from turning into a blood feud. To channel this energy, the Jarl might call for the skald. The hall quiets once more as a man with a lyre or a small harp takes a prominent position near the fire. He is a professional poet, a keeper of histories, and a shaper of reputations. He begins to chant, his voice rhythmic and hypnotic, his fingers plucking a sparse melody from the strings. He might tell an ancient story of the gods, of Odin's quest for wisdom, or Thor's battles with the giants. Or he might perform a new poem, composed especially for this night, praising the Jarl's own victories and generosity, the very gift-giving that has just been witnessed. As the skald's voice fills the hall, you see the faces of the warriors. They are captivated, transported. The poetry is their history, their entertainment, and their moral code, all woven together. It reminds them of who they are, from whom they are descended, and what is expected of them. The rhythm of the poetry is like a steady oarstroke, a comforting, lulling cadence that smooths over the rough edges of pride and alcohol. Slowly, the great feast winds down. The fire begins to burn lower, collapsing into a glowing bed of embers. The last of the mead is drunk. The skald's tale comes to its end. One by one, and in small groups, the men find their places on the sleeping benches that line the walls, pulling furs and cloaks over themselves. The great hall, moments ago a place of roaring celebration, transforms back into a communal dormitory. The air cools. The smells of cooked meat fade, leaving only the scent of smoke and sleeping bodies. The Jarl remains in his high seat for a moment, looking over the hall now filled with the quiet, deep breathing of his followers. The feast is over. Oaths have been sworn, loyalty has been reinforced, and status has been displayed. For another night, the delicate balance has been held. And in the immense quiet of the sleeping hall, you let the rhythm of their breathing guide your own, as the last of the firelight gutters and dies, and the deep darkness returns. We have sat in the high seat of the Jarl and felt the weight of his power. We have heard the ring of the blacksmith's hammer and the whispers of a steel blade's mysterious origins. But in all these spaces, the grand and the humble, another kind of power was at work. A power that was quieter, less celebrated in the skald's verse, but no less essential to the survival and prosperity of the Norse world. Let us now turn our focus away from the sword arm and the explorer's gaze and back towards the heart of the home. Let us consider the world within the threshold, a domain governed not by force, but by skill, knowledge, and quiet authority. This is the world of the Norse woman, the husfreyja, the lady of the household. In a world where a harsh winter could mean the difference between life and starvation, this was a position of immense responsibility. She was the quartermaster of survival. Her day was a constant hum of management and production. Her primary and most visible contribution was the creation of textiles. Let us return to the image of the vertical loom, a heavy wooden frame propped against an internal wall of the longhouse. The process of turning a sheep's fleece into a warm cloak was incredibly long and laborious, and it was entirely within the woman's sphere. First came the shearing of the sheep. Then, the raw wool had to be cleaned of dirt, grease, and twigs. After that, it was carded, a process of combing the fibers between two wire-toothed paddles to align them into a soft, airy mass called a rolag. Then came the spinning. Imagine a woman sitting by the fire, a drop spindle in her hand. A drop spindle is a simple tool, a weighted disc or whirl attached to a short wooden shaft. With a practiced flick of her fingers, she sets the spindle rotating, and as it spins, it twists the drafted fibers from the rolag into a strong, continuous thread. This was not a quick task. It was a constant background activity, performed in any spare moment, while watching the stew, while telling stories, while listening to the men mend their tools. It would take countless hours of spinning to produce enough thread to weave even a small piece of cloth. The thread was then dyed, using colors derived from the natural world. Yellows from the weld plant, blues from woad, reds from the madder root. The woman of the house was a practical chemist, understanding how to use mordants like alum or even stale urine to fix the colors to the wool fibers. Finally came the weaving. The warp threads were tied to the top beam of the loom, and their tension was maintained by a row of heavy weights, often smooth stones or baked clay discs tied to the bottom. The weaver would then pass the weft thread back and forth using a shuttle and pack the threads down tightly with a weaving sword, a smooth flat piece of wood or bone. The rhythm of her work filled the longhouse, the soft thump of the weaving sword against the threads, the gentle clacking of the weights as she adjusted the tension. It was a slow, patient, and highly skilled art. The cloth she produced, the simple, sturdy homespun called vadmal, was a form of currency as valuable as silver. It was used for clothing, for sails for the longships, and for trade. A woman's skill at the loom was a direct measure of her family's wealth and comfort, but her knowledge extended beyond the loom. The land around the settlement was her apothecary. The Norse woman was the keeper of herbal lore, a knowledge passed down from mother to daughter. She knew which plants could soothe a fever, which could be made into a poultice to draw infection from a wound, and which could ease the pain of childbirth. Imagine her in the late summer, walking through the meadows and along the edges of the forest. She is not wandering aimlessly. Her eyes are trained to spot the plants she needs. She gathers yarrow, known for its ability to staunch bleeding. Its Old Norse name translates to wound herb. She collects the leaves of the comfrey plant to make a paste for mending broken bones. She finds meadowsweet to ease aches and pains. She dries these herbs carefully, hanging them from the rafters of the longhouse, creating a store of medicine to see the family through the dark, sickness-prone months of winter. When a child fell ill with a fever, or a man returned from the forest with a deep gash in his leg, it was the husfreyja who was called upon. She would act with a calm and methodical competence. You can picture her by the hearth, crushing dried herbs with a stone, mixing them with lard or water to create a salve. Her touch would be gentle but firm as she cleaned a wound and applied the remedy. This was not magic. It was practical medicine, a deep, empirical understanding of the natural world. The Norse woman also held a significant position in the legal and social framework. Marriage was a contract between two families, an alliance for mutual benefit. A woman brought a dowry into the marriage, and this property remained her own. She had the right to inherit property, and she had the right to divorce a husband who was lazy, abusive, or unable to provide for the family. If she divorced, she took her dowry with her. In a world that we often view as brutally patriarchal, the Norse woman possessed a surprising degree of agency and legal protection. Upon the death of her husband, the Jarl, the husfreyja often took over the running of the farmstead. She became the head of the household until her son came of age. There are runestones, those great stone memorials that were commissioned by women in memory of their husbands or sons, a public declaration of their status and wealth. So let us adjust our image of the longhouse. It is not simply a hall for warriors, but a complex, functioning economic unit, and the woman is its chief operating officer. Her power is not loud or performative, but quiet, constant, and indispensable. It is woven into the very fabric of the clothes they wear, simmered into the stews that sustain them, and infused into the remedies that heal them. As the evening settles and the men talk of raids and honor, she sits by the fire, her spindle turning, her mind on the inventory of the storehouse, the mending that needs to be done, the health of the children, and the endless, vital rhythm of her work. Her presence is a quiet anchor, the steady hand that ensures the longhouse will survive to see another dawn. Let your own mind settle into that quiet rhythm, the gentle turning of the spindle, the soft thump of the loom, the very pulse of the Viking household. We have explored the physical world of the Viking Age, the smoky longhouse, the wild shores of a new continent, the fiery heart of the forge. We have felt the weight of the Jarl's power and the quiet strength in the keys at a woman's hip. But to truly understand the rhythm of these lives, we must now look beyond the visible. We must try to perceive the world as they did. A world layered with meaning, animated by unseen forces, and governed by a deep and unchangeable cosmic order. Let your mind settle. We are now entering the invisible landscape of the Norse people, a world not of solid earth and cold iron, but of belief, ritual, and fate. This was a world that existed alongside their own, as real and as present as the winter snow or the summer sun. For the farmer whose life we first imagined, the world was not an empty wilderness. Every feature of the landscape was inhabited. The ancient, moss-covered boulder in the corner of his field was not just a rock. It was the home of a spirit, a landvetter, or land wight. The bubbling spring that provided fresh water was not merely a geological feature. It was a sacred place, watched over by its own guardian. This was a world alive with presence. These spirits of the land, the hidden folk, were not gods to be worshipped from afar, but neighbors to be respected and appeased. They were the original inhabitants, and the humans who built their farms and villages were newcomers, living on their sufferance. To maintain harmony, or frida, small rituals were a part of daily life. A farmer might leave a bowl of milk or a piece of bread by a prominent stone or an old tree as a small gift, a gesture of goodwill. When a ship returned to its home fjord, the fearsome carved dragon head on its prow would be taken down or covered. It was believed that these ferocious symbols, designed to terrify enemies abroad, would frighten and offend the gentle guardian spirits of the homeland. This was a relationship built on reciprocity and respect. To offend the landwights could bring misfortune, a failed crop, a sick animal, an unexplained accident. Life was a constant, quiet negotiation with the unseen forces that shared the world with you. Beyond these local spirits were the greater powers, the gods and goddesses who inhabited the realm of Asgard. These were not ethereal, perfect beings, but powerful figures with distinct personalities, ambitions, and flaws. Imagine, if you will, the head of this pantheon, Odin, the Allfather. He was not a god you would pray to for simple comforts. He was a restless, driven, and often unsettling figure, defined by his relentless quest for knowledge. The stories told of him were not of easy victories, but of sacrifice for the sake of wisdom. He plucked out his own eye and dropped it into the well of Mimir in exchange for a drink that granted him cosmic understanding. He hung himself from a branch of Yggdrasil, the great world tree, wounded by his own spear, for 9 days and 9 nights to learn the secrets of the runes. He was the god of poets, of chieftains, and of the esoteric magic known as Seder. But his wisdom was hard-won and carried a dark, solemn weight. Then there was Thor. While Odin was the god of the elite, Thor was the god of the common man. He was a figure of immense strength and simple purpose, the protector of Midgard, the world of humanity. He was a force of order against the chaos represented by the Jötnar, the giants. The distant rumble of thunder was not just weather, it was the sound of Thor's chariot pulled by goats across the sky. A lightning strike was the flash of his hammer, Mjolnir, thrown in battle against the enemies of mankind. Farmers would carve the shape of his hammer on the beams of their homes as a symbol of protection. He was not a god of subtle schemes, but of dependable, reassuring strength. And there was Freya, a goddess of the Vanir tribe of deities. She was the embodiment of fertility, love, and abundance. But she was no simple Earth Mother. She was also a powerful practitioner of Seder and a warrior goddess in her own right. It was said that she would ride into battle on a chariot pulled by cats, and that she would choose half of the warriors slain in battle to live in her own hall, Folkvanga, while Odin took the other half to Valhalla. She was a figure of immense power, representing both life's greatest pleasures and the solemn realities of death. These gods were not just figures in stories, they were active forces. But perhaps the most profound concept shaping the Norse worldview was not a god, but an idea. The concept of Urlog, or fate. Fate was not seen as a set of predetermined events. It was imagined as a vast, intricate tapestry, woven by 3 mysterious female figures known as the Norns. They lived at the base of the world tree, Yggdrasil, by the well of Urda. Their names were Urda, representing that which has become, Verdandi, that which is in the process of becoming, and Skuld, that which should be. Imagine them, 3 silent figures, their faces unreadable, their hands forever engaged in their cosmic work. They spin the threads of every life, of gods, of giants, and of humans, and weave them together into an immense interconnected pattern. Not even Odin could see the full design of their tapestry or alter its course. The pattern was set. A Norseman did not believe he could change his fate, the length of his life, the manner of his death. These things were already woven into the great design. This belief did not lead to despair, but to a kind of stoic courage. Since one's fate was inescapable, the only thing a person could control was how they met it. The goal was to live in such a way that you would be remembered well, to face your unchangeable destiny with honor, courage, and dignity. A person's reputation, the story that would be told about them after their thread was cut from the loom, was the only true immortality they could achieve. This worldview even extended to the fate of the gods themselves. They knew through prophecy that their world was not eternal. They were destined to face a final cataclysmic battle, Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods. Try to picture this not as a frantic, fiery apocalypse, but as a slow, sorrowful, and inevitable winter. The prophecies told that there would be an age of wind and wolves, a time when the bonds of kinship would break down. The sun would be swallowed by a great wolf, and the stars would vanish from the sky. The great world tree, Yggdrasil, would tremble. The giants and monsters would break free, and the final battle would be fought on a vast plain. In this battle, the great gods would fall. Odin would be consumed by the wolf Fenrir. Thor would defeat the world serpent Jörmungandr, but would then take only 9 steps before succumbing to its venom. It was a pre-written doom, a tragedy that all the gods knew was coming, yet which they would ride out to face with courage. But even this was not the absolute end. The stories told that after the world sinks into the sea, a new world will be born, green and beautiful. The sun's daughter will take her mother's place in the sky. A new generation of gods, and the few humans who survive, will emerge to populate a world renewed. It is a cycle of destruction and rebirth, a deep cosmic rhythm of decay and regeneration. This, then, was the invisible landscape of the Viking mind, a world filled with local spirits that must be respected, governed by powerful but fallible gods, and bound by the inescapable, intricate weave of fate. It was a worldview that gave structure to a life of hardship, meaning to a life of struggle, and a framework for meeting the inevitable with courage. As the fire burns low in the longhouse, imagine this web of belief settling over the sleeping forms like a soft, invisible blanket, shaping their dreams and giving comfort against the deep, unknowable darkness of the night. We have journeyed through the tangible world of the Viking longhouse and the invisible realm of Norse belief. We have seen how the harshest realities of survival were interwoven with a deep sense of a world alive with spirit and governed by fate. But no society exists in a vacuum. The world of the 9th, 10th, and 11th centuries was one of profound change, of shifting powers and colliding cultures. Let us now take our final step back. We will look beyond the shores of Scandinavia and consider the twilight of the age we have been exploring. An era does not end in a single battle or with the death of a single king. It ends in a slow, almost imperceptible transformation, as new ideas, new technologies, and new ways of life gradually replace the old. This is the story of how the Viking Age slowly faded into the tapestry of medieval Europe. The feast in the Jarl's Hall, with its boasting warriors and oaths sworn on the drinking horn, represented the heart of the old Norse social structure. It was a world built on personal loyalty, a web of relationships between a chieftain and his retinue. Power was decentralized, held by countless jarls and petty kings, each governing their own local territory. This system, which had fueled the Viking expansion for centuries, was also what made it vulnerable to a new and powerful force, the centralized feudal kingdoms of Christian Europe. The process of conversion, which began with figures like Leif Erikson carrying the new faith to Greenland, was one of the primary engines of this change. Initially, the adoption of Christianity was often pragmatic. A Viking chieftain trading regularly with the Frankish kingdoms might find it advantageous to be baptized. It smoothed trade negotiations and offered a way to build alliances with powerful Christian rulers. For a time, the new faith could exist alongside the old. It was not uncommon for a warrior to wear a Thor's hammer amulet on the same chain as a Christian cross, covering all possibilities. But the new religion brought with it a fundamentally different model of society. It came with a written language, Latin, and a class of literate clerics who could manage accounts, draft laws, and create a permanent record of royal authority. It brought the concept of the divine right of kings, the idea that a king's power came not from his ability to be a great ring-giver, but directly from God. Over generations, ambitious Scandinavian leaders began to adopt this model. They saw how kings in England, France, and the Holy Roman Empire were able to consolidate power, levy taxes on a national scale, and raise armies that were loyal not just to a local chieftain, but to the crown itself. Men like Harald Bluetooth in Denmark and Olaf Tryggvason in Norway, the very king who sent Leif Erikson on his mission, used Christianity as a tool to unify their fractured realms. They built churches, established bishoprics, and gradually replaced the old system of personal loyalties with a more formal, hierarchical structure of governance. This process was not always peaceful. It often involved brutal civil wars, as kings who had converted to the new faith sought to impose it upon chieftains who clung fiercely to the old ways. But the momentum was undeniable. The construction of a stone church in a village was a powerful statement. It was a permanent, monumental structure that dwarfed the wooden longhouses. Its bell tower called the community to prayer at set times, imposing a new rhythm on the day, one that was disconnected from the seasons and the tasks of the farm. The parish priest began to take over roles that had once belonged to the community elders or the wise woman, officiating at births, marriages, and burials, and offering guidance that was based not on ancient custom, but on church doctrine. The end of the Viking Age as an era of raiding and expansion is often marked by a single symbolic date, 1066. In that year, the Norwegian king Harald Hardrada, whose name means hard ruler, launched a massive invasion of England, seeking to claim the English throne. He was one of the last great Viking warrior kings, a man who had served as a mercenary in the elite Varangian Guard of the Byzantine Emperor in Constantinople. His invasion was the final grand-scale Viking campaign against England. At the Battle of Stamford Bridge, his Norwegian army was met by the English forces of King Harold Godwinson. The battle was a catastrophe for the Norwegians. Hardrada himself was killed, struck in the throat by an arrow, and his army was shattered. Just a few weeks later, the English king, Harold Godwinson, would himself be defeated and killed at the Battle of Hastings by another descendant of Vikings, William the Conqueror, the Duke of Normandy. The Normans, or Northmen, were descended from Viking raiders who had settled in northern France generations earlier, adopted the French language, and fully integrated into the European feudal system. In a way, the battle for the English crown in 1066 was fought between three men of Viking heritage, each representing a different stage of its evolution. Hardrada was the Old World, Godwinson the Anglo-Norse fusion, and William the fully Europeanized future. With the defeat at Stamford Bridge, the great age of Viking raiding effectively came to an end. The energy that had once been directed outwards, in longship voyages of plunder and exploration, was now turned inwards. The newly consolidated kingdoms of Denmark, Norway, and Sweden began to behave more like their European neighbours. They engaged in dynastic struggles, forged political alliances, and participated in the Crusades. The Viking was being replaced by the knight. The changes were felt even in the quietest corners of life. The old trade routes, like the Volga route that brought the Ulfbert steel from the east, began to decline, replaced by new networks dominated by German merchant leagues. The unique artistic styles, with their intricate animals and gripping beasts, slowly gave way to the more uniform Romanesque and Gothic styles of Christian Europe. The sagas were eventually written down by Christian scholars like Snorri Sturluson in Iceland, preserving the old stories but also framing them from a new perspective, sometimes treating the old gods more like historical figures or literary characters than as living deities. The invisible world began to change as well. The Landwights did not vanish overnight, but they were rebranded. The spirit in the spring might become associated with a local saint. The old gods were demonized, turned into devils and fiends in the sermons of the priests. The concept of Urlurg, the unchangeable tapestry of fate, was slowly replaced by the Christian concept of divine will and the promise of salvation based on faith and good works. This was not a sudden death, but a long, slow twilight, a fading of the old ways of life, belief, and power, and the dawn of a new medieval reality. The Viking Age did not truly end, it simply assimilated. It became one of the many threads woven into the fabric of what would become modern Europe, leaving behind a legacy in our language, in our laws, and in the faint, persistent echo of a world that was both harder and, in some ways, more enchanted than our own. As we end our journey Let the image of this long, slow transformation settle in your mind. Picture the stone church rising beside the old wooden hall, its shadow slowly stretching longer with each passing year, until it covers the place where the Jarl once held his feasts, and the Skald once sang his tales of gods and heroes.